Before I bring this table saw over there out of the way, I just want to talk about a couple things in the video that I made about this saw, in particular the fence. A lot of people pointed out that the fence can move just by pushing it back and forth. And in the video, I honestly kind of gapped on that. And yes, it does move, but it doesn't move as quickly as I would like for it to do because it's still dragging that knob. And that was kind of the point. I really don't see the need for the knob. People say that it's okay for fine adjustments. I don't see that, actually. I'd much rather do the fine adjustments with my hands like this. If it's not dragging that knob, it makes it a lot easier. And then the other thing was concerning this auxiliary fence right here. I have no experience with this particular saw or these particular saws in general. I had a saw similar to this a long time ago, a Makita, that didn't have this kind of feature on it, so I'm not familiar with it. I didn't read the manual. I didn't realize that this will support the work out here, but it also will go in that position right there to get in tighter to the fence. So that's the thing that I saw, that's the thing that I commented on. But I got lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. And if I'm saying lots and too much, it really, reflects how many comments I got on it that repeated the same thing over and over again. And this is a common problem whenever you make a video. Someone will watch it as far as they go into the video where they see a mistake or something that they don't agree with, and then they'll stop watching and they'll immediately go to the comments and type out their comment. They won't bother to look and see if someone else or, 2 other people or 20 other people already made that same comment. I even put these things in my initial comment that I pin at the top of the comment so it'd be easier for them to see. They ignore that and they just make the comment. And it's a little bit frustrating, I've got to be honest. And it's not just me that it's frustrating for. It's everybody that does this stuff. So please, just take a few minutes. I know I've said this many times in many other videos, but please take a minute just to glance through the comments to see that your comment is already posted. So let's get right into the project here. This is jig number 1, I guess you could say, for the dovetails on the table saw jig or method. This is going to cut the tails in the piece of wood. And after I did the last prototype video, I went in, I sat down, I thought about it, and I worked up something else in SketchUp, something that can actually be indexed easily. And that's what I'm going to do in this video. That jig, this jig is the simpler of the two. The other one is a bit more complex, and I'll get into that in another video. First thing I want to do is cut the base, and the base is 9 inches wide, or 9 inches deep, and 14 inches wide. All right, so I haven't worked out the exact ideal location for this. I figured the best way to do it is to put this thing together, try it out, and see how it works out. And that's what makes a prototype, basically. So what I've done is I've cut a runner, or I actually had this one in the cabinet over there, and I put some washers in the track to lift it up a little bit. And I'm going to position the base up against the fence. That keeps it square to the miter slot because the fence is parallel to the miter slot. And I'm just going to use my pin nailer to nail it on in 2 or 3 places, or maybe 4. And then I can take it out of there and I can put screws through to hold it on there better. Okay, that goes in there, slides smoothly. Put that aside. Most of the rest of the parts are 14 inches wide as well. The fence that doesn't move, the fence above that does move, all the rest of the parts. The first thing I want to attach is the non-moving fence, you could say. And I'm going to use the 4-inch piece that is the upper fence to space it from the front, because I want to have 4 inches clear in front of that fence to stack boards in. Which kind of makes sense, because if you've got 4 3/4 inch boards, that's 3 inches. You want a little bit more space to line up the cuts and whatnot. So I'm going to clamp that on there with a couple spring clamps, like so. I'm not going to use any glue on this, because like I say, this is a prototype, and that will space that correctly from the front. I always like making stuff like this, where it's a built-up arrangement, and you can use other parts to line up the parts that you're putting on. Like this part will be used up above, and it lines this part up so that you don't have to try to clamp it in place while I drive in nails. It doesn't move all over the place. So I've got my most used nailer, and I'm going to be driving my most driven nails, which are 1 1/4 inch. And this is an 18 gauge brad nailer, very handy to have. I highly recommend having one. Kind of a luxury as a pin nailer, and that was in the wrong spot when I just nailed it. So I got to pull it off, pull the nail out. Now, some days go great, you know, and nothing goes wrong. Everything comes up aces, you could say. Other days, like today already, even though it's very early, things are screwing up. Okay, I'm going to try that again. Stick that in there. Hold it up tight against the fence this time. Pay attention to make sure that's actually there. And then I can drive in a nail. I want to make sure my fingers are clear from where that nail can come out. Too often that will curl out and stick out the side of the wood. All right, so that one's attached. I drove in a couple more nails. Wow. Making sure, I can't even hold on to anything today. Making sure that the nails are not driven into the area where the blade is going to be. You don't want to be cutting through these nails. Okay, I've got the other part that goes on the back here. I'm basically going to do the same thing, except I'll use the part that's already there to line it up. Let's put a couple of spring clamps on it to hold it in place, and I'll drive in a few brads that will hold it in place. Let's do that from the other side over here. I've got this one to put on. This will support the deck on the back where your hands will be. And it's the same height as the one on the front here, 1.5 inches. So I'll line that up, clamp it on. And then, because the total thickness here is 1.5 inches almost, I can nail through this one into the other two. Once again, making sure that I'm not driving nails into the area where the saw is going to cut. Alrighty then, the deck is right here. This is the same size as this piece over here that makes that fence. This deck goes here like here. I need parts to support it, so I've cut more pieces that are 1.5 inches wide. Just going to cut them to length using my very handy mini table saw sled. I've got a piece of threaded rod here that's 3/8, and 3/8 threaded rod has 16 teeth per inch. Usually I'm going to cut that to 14 inches long, and that will go on the top of the jig, and that'll be the indexing system for it. Lots will be about a half dozen comments here saying, oh, why don't you move that further into your vise and it'll make it easier to cut? Like, I wouldn't know that. Yeah, I'm going to let you in on a little secret about making these videos. Doing it is distracting. You have to concentrate on like 100 other different things other than the operation that you're kind of doing mindlessly. I've cut hundreds of pieces of threaded rod and I don't give it a single thought. And putting it in the vise like that really doesn't bother me. I still got it cut after all. Anyway, I'm going to glue this on top of here with my hot melt glue. Just going to put a bead up on this end up here, if the damn thing will work. And one down here. And try to get the rod in place before that hardens up, because it's quite cool in my shop. 5 degrees Celsius. That is 41 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's the temperature I keep the shop at in the winter. I can't afford to heat it any warmer than that. It would cost too much money. And I'm not a millionaire. I'm working on YouTube after all. Okay, so that'll do for the prototype, I think. And that glue will hold it on well, but in the final version, of course, that would be glued on with epoxy or construction adhesive or something, like that, that really holds it on there well. Okay, we're in the home stretch now, believe it or not. Okay, so here's the fence that moves. That goes on here. This is another piece that I just cut. It's about 7/8 of an inch wide. Basically, I cut it that wide because that's the piece that I had left over from cutting the other stuff. And that will sit right on top of the threaded rod, basically like that. And then I cut another piece of plywood, and that will go behind here. So that locks all that together so it will, kind of stay steady on the thing here. So I'm going to attach those things, I'm going to fasten those things together using screws mostly, but what I need to do is I need to shim this piece out so it winds up, I wind up having space on this thing here so it can move back and forth correctly. This plywood is the same thickness as this down here, so if I add a shim to it, the space that I have left over on the inside will be bigger and it will move properly. So I'm going to use just paper, which is my usual method for shimming this stuff out. I think 2 layers will do it. I've got an old piece here that I've got some script written on here that I made up. With the stand fully assembled and the casters attached, I can load on the planer and get that in the right position. I really fucking hate doing voiceovers, I'll tell you that. And you can probably hear that in my videos where I do them. I feel much more comfortable talking directly to the camera. For some reason, I don't know. Probably some mental condition that I have to go along with the several others that I already have. Okay, so I got 2 strips of this cut out. And what I'll do is I'll just use some glue stick to stick them on there temporarily until I get the screws through them. And 1 1/4 inch screws that shouldn't go through the front. And they don't. All right, I've only got one more thing to do with this before I can test it out. And that is to add a washer to the end here that will index into this threaded rod. So what I need to do is, this is a 3/16 inch fender washer. It's the size of a 1/4 inch washer, but it's got a hole for a 3/16 inch bolt in there. I use these quite a lot for this kind of thing because the hole is smaller. You can use a 1/4 inch washer, but most screw heads will go right through that hole actually, because it's more like a 5/16 inch hole in a 1/4 inch washer, which is, a bit too big. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to grind the edge until it's a knife point so that it fits right into the threads in this threaded rod. Okay, so I've got the washer sharpened. And I'm just going to put it in place here and pretend that that mark is not there, because I already did that when the camera wasn't recording, when it was supposed to be recording. And so that drops in place like that, and it fits down inside the threads in the washer or the threaded rod. And then I'll make that mark so that I can drill a pilot hole in here to mount that washer in place. After I got this thing finished, I did a couple of other things. I cut a blank of plywood that I'm going to do the test cut on. This is just the same 1/2-inch plywood that I'm using here. I also had lunch and gave it a lot of thought how, the best way to make this so that it's repeatable or transferable from one jig to the other. And it does involve some hand layout. Now, initially what I have here, this is just another piece of paper, and I've marked out the width of the piece that I'm going to be cutting, and I laid out the dovetails on here that I want to cut. So I'll be able to take this, tape it onto the jig, so I can line that up onto this jig. And then when I'm done with that, I can take it off of that jig and I can transfer it to the other jig and make the pins cut in the same way. It really doesn't matter where this goes right now, just as long as it's over this way. And then I'll tape it in place. One thing I want to make sure is that I keep this in good shape for the next part of the operation. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make a mark on here that lines up with the very first mark on the template strip. Okay, you know what? I gotta admit that I'm pretty much making this up as I go along. So if I make a mistake here, don't treat it like it's the end of the world. Or don't pounce in there and say, oh, look, he's not perfect after all. He makes mistakes. Please, please try to understand that, no, I'm not perfect. I do have a lot of experience doing this kind of stuff, but what you're watching here is something that's brand new. At least to me. I haven't done this particular thing before. So I didn't rehearse it, 2 days ahead of time. My production staff didn't write up all the details that I need to know. So keep that in mind when you're watching this. Anyway, I've got my piece here. I've got the mark on here, and I'm just going to line that up with the edge of that cut that I just made. And I'm going to use a spring clamp to hold that in place. Now the idea is to make a few cuts actually at that angle right there. I'll move it, I'll hold it in this position, make a cut, and then I'll move it over one thread, which is a 1/16 of an inch. I'll make another cut. I'll move it over another thread, which is another 1/16 of an inch, make another cut, and so on until I come close to what is the other mark that's on my template here. Then I can move to the next dovetail and cut that one in the same way. After that's done, what I can do is flip my board around. So that reminds me, I need to make a mark on here. I would have in real life, in the real jig, I would have a stop that would slide over for this to go against, but a mark will do for now. So without any more to say, I'm going to make my first cut. I got to move it back first. See, I was about to make a mistake. What I'm going to do now actually is return it back to where it started from, and then I'm going to take my clamps off here and I'm going to flip the board around, line it up with my mark, be better if there was a stop there. And that'll be in the final version, if this thing actually works the way I envision it working. I clamp that on because a lot depends upon the next jig that cuts the pins to match up with this. So that goes there. It looks like I don't have to make that first cut, so I can actually move it to the next one to make a cut to begin with. Or actually, that won't work. See, now I'm seeing a problem here. This is supposed to go the other way. So I've got to rethink that. So I have to shut off the camera to do that. Okay, I gave it some thought. Didn't take long. I think what I need to do, I know that this will solve the problem, I think, is just I need to make another mark on the other side of that, those two marks. Right now they're spaced apart 1/4 inch. All I need to do is make a mark on this side of each one that's 1/4 inch away as well. And that should solve my problem for alignment. The other way would be to make a new mark or make 2 pointers on the jig to use for each location, or on the carriage, I mean the part that moves, so that one pointer would be used for one way and the other pointer would be used for the other. But I think that that would be more confusing than having these 2 marks on here. And then you could put an X on one and leave the other one open so that you know which one to start with and you wouldn't get confused. I hope. Anyway, I'll put it back on and we'll try again. Now if I line that up with that mark, of course the pointer now is off the thing, so that is a problem. But I'll have to work out that detail. I really need to spend a little bit more time in SketchUp, armed with the information that I'm discovering today, to come up with neat solutions with this and the best way to line all this up. Looking at it, it looks okay. It looks good. Not perfect, but perfection will come. Take my word for it. Anyway, it did space the... I gotta, like I said, I've got to give it a bit more thought, because each of the pins or the dovetails is exactly a 1/2 inch, and they are evenly spaced, except for at the end here. I think I made this one a little bit, or I made some cut here that I shouldn't have. I think I went too far on that one and not far enough on the beginning of it. That's what it looks like. Anyway, so that's the basic premise here. The concept on how this works. It indexes to this threaded rod. It will move that set amount each time. It'll be easy to lock in the position. I just got the details to work out, especially the template system and the start position. It's a little bit confusing because when you're cutting this, the angles change and all that. So next time, in the next video, I don't know if it'll be the next video I make on this channel, probably not. I'll have to go back to the drawing board and work out some more details. In the next one, I'll have the problem solved in this, and I'll work on the pins jig, which is bigger and more complex than this one.